If you'd seen Robert's repairs, you'd most likely have thought it was just a simple, small-town repair shop. The owner, Robert, just another typical grease monkey. In reality, though, there was much more to the shop and its owner. The most interesting fact about Robert was that he could fix anything. I don't remember when it started, but one day the people in my hometown found out that Robert was not just a typical mechanic, but more of a jack of all trades. It made no difference to him if it was a car, a toy, a household appliance, or electronic device. Good old Robert would fix it. Something broke or was damaged, he brought it to Robert's repairs, and it was good as new. As a person, too, Robert was extremely interesting. I remember the first time I ever talked to him was when I got my bike back. The chain and the gears had all been entangled and damaged, so my parents brought it over to Robert. He told us to be back in a couple days. It was completely fixed when I came back to the shop. He told me to be more careful in handling the gears and that I should make sure to keep them sufficiently greased and oiled so it wouldn't happen again. I thanked him, and before I left, I asked him how he was able to fix all those things that people brought over. I had been interested in machines and mechanisms ever since I was little, so you could say that because of all the stories, Robert had become sort of a role model to me. It's simple, he started to explain. Every mechanism, machine, or tool is made up of parts. Like this clock, see? He picked up a small clock he had found sitting on his workbench. It doesn't matter what it is, the bigger and more complex it is, the more parts there are, sure. But in the end, it's always the same principle. What you do is that you disassemble it into all of its parts. With that, he opened up the back of the clock to reveal the inner workings, and started to take out the various gears, springs, and other parts. Then you have to find out which of them is broken, damaged, or causing problems. Like this one here in case of this clock. He held up a weirdly deformed spring. Now you just have to fix it or replace it and put it back together. While Robert replaced the spring with a new one and carefully put the clock back together, I just stood there dumbfounded. For 9-year-old me, it was as if I had just found the Holy Grail. The biggest secret in the whole wide world had been revealed to me. Robert must have noticed because he started to laugh. I'm sure I must have been standing there mouth wide agape, not saying anything. From this day onward, I spent a lot of time at Robert's shop. My parents knew and were happy about it. I had found a new hobby, and hopefully I'd learn a thing or two. I quickly grew to like Robert and soon found out that he not only knew a lot about mechanics, but also a variety of other topics. When he didn't have to fix anything, he'd teach me about science or he'd tell me things from history. He even gave me a couple of his old books. They were mostly on math, but there were some on science and electronics as well. I love that stuff. Robert was the smartest guy in the world to me. My opinion of him would get even higher, though. One day, a little boy with his pet came over to Robert's shop. He was crying and said his kitty was sick and hurt, and he had no idea what to do or where to go. Robert, the good guy he was, nodded and told the boy everything would be alright. He'd take care of everything, and the boy should come back in a few days. It was exactly what he told me when I brought over my bike. "What are you going to do with it?" I asked Robert once the boy was gone. "Are you going to bring it to the hospital or call the animal doctor?" Robert just laughed. "No need for that," he said in his ever-happy and euphoric way. "Nothing I can't take care of myself." "What do you mean, Robert?" I stared at him, wondering what he was talking about. "Remember what I told you before, that everything's made up of parts?" I nodded. "Well, it's the same with animals, too. They're just big, organic machines. You just gotta find the parts that are broken, fix them, and, well, they'll be fine again." "But that's not how animals work," I said in protest. We'll see about that, shall we? With that, he carefully took the little hurt cat in his arms and walked towards a door at the back of his shop, and I started to follow him. Now hold on a second, Mark, will ya? He said to me as he vanished behind the door. A few moments later, he was back, but without the cat. What did you do with it? I just put it somewhere safe. Can't have the little guy in here with all the grease and dirt around, can we? What's behind the door? I asked him and went forward to open it and see for myself. Robert put his arm in front of me. Sorry, that's top secret. I pouted and complained for a little while, but Robert didn't give in. In the end, I spent the rest of the afternoon helping him repair an old TV set, and afterwards made my way home. On the way, I was thinking about what he had told me. That same evening, during dinner, I asked my parents how you'd fix animals. They simply laughed, and soon the topic changed to something else. When I went to Robert's shop again a few days later, I couldn't believe my eyes. Right at the front porch was a little kitty, sleeping and purring, not a worry in the world. I recognized it right away as the one that the little boy had brought over the other day. I went closer to it and casually started petting it. It opened its eyes, looked at me, and then rubbed its little head against my hand. The kitty was perfectly fine. Robert saw me playing with it and gave a little thumbs up. Good as new. How did you do it, Robert? Exactly as I told you. I simply fixed the broken parts. I made a sour face at his simple answer, but Robert just ignored it. When the little boy came over, he was overjoyed. He started to cry tears of joy when he saw his little friend was all right. His parents, who accompanied him, thanked Robert for saving the cat. Robert simply smiled and nodded. It was from this day onwards that people would not only bring all sorts of items and appliances to Robert, but also their sick pets. Apparently, Robert really could fix anything. A cat with broken legs, well, she'd be fine a few days later. A limping dog, same thing. A dying hamster, he'd be fit and full of life again. During this time, I was at the store even more often than before. There'd always be animals around to play with. It was only the healthy ones, though, the ones that Robert had already fixed, as he used to say. Always, the other ones were kept in what Robert now called the top secret room, and I had no idea what exactly he did with them in there or how he went about fixing them. The thought of how Robert was doing all these things stayed on my young mind for quite some time. More than once did I try to sneak into that room, but either I found the door locked or was caught by Robert. In time, though, I accepted it as the way things were supposed to be. Maybe Robert had a secret medicine that no one else knew of. My doubts about Robert were reawoken in the middle of the summer break. It was then that Robert did something that even I, as a kid, knew to be completely and utterly impossible. It was a normal Saturday afternoon, and I spent it at Robert's shop as usual. I was playing with a cat and waiting for Robert to fix up an old bike. He had promised to teach me a few more things about electronics once he was done. My attention was drawn from the cat to a car that suddenly arrived and came to a stop with squealing tires. A crying woman jumped out of the passenger seat, followed by a man on the driver's seat, and the woman came running over towards Robert. "You have to save her," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Robert walked towards her, his expression instantly serious. "What happened?" The woman continued to talk to him, but I couldn't make out all of it. I heard the words accident and car, and then she was pleading with him over and over and over again to save her, to do it again. I didn't understand what he was talking about. Robert motioned her to be quiet and hurried over to the man who brought out the limp body of a little girl from the back seat. "She was hit about 10 minutes ago," I heard the man say. There was so much blood, it was everywhere. I was shocked and looked on wide-eyed. The arms and legs were dangling from her body. She wasn't moving at all. And when I saw her face, for a moment, her eyes were completely empty. "Go home for today, Mark. I'll teach you another day," he said to me as he motioned for the father to bring the girl inside. I didn't understand what was going on. Why did they bring the girl to Robert? I wanted to stay and started to follow them inside. But Robert noticed me, and after a few moments, for the first time ever, he seemed to be mad at me. "I told you to go home, Mark," he yelled at me. It was the first time I had ever heard him like that. His voice had changed. It was loud and serious, even a little scary. And I left right away. I didn't understand how he'd do it, but I already knew what was going to happen. The girl had been hurt, and her parents had brought her to Robert so that he could fix her. I told myself that was stupid. There were hospitals. They could call a doctor. Animals were one thing, but humans were different, right? When I got home, I told my parents what had happened, but they simply nodded and didn't say much. They probably didn't believe me or didn't really understand what I was talking about. I must have been way too agitated. I later heard the whole story of what happened that day. The little girl was named Margaret Miller and was 11 years old. She had dropped something while crossing the main street with her parents and ran back without watching. The driver of an oncoming car had no chance to stop in time, and she was run over. The people who saw it said it was a terrible accident, and everyone was sure that the girl had died instantly. That's when the parents took her and brought her over to Robert. My skin started to crawl when I went over to Robert's shop the next time. At first I wasn't sure, but soon there was no mistaking it. A little girl was sitting on the bench in front of the store, smiling happily at me as I came closer, and I stared at her wide-eyed for a moment. "Who are you? Are you Robert's daughter?" "Hi, my name's Margaret," she answered with a big smile and held her hand out to me. While I shook her hand, I remembered the name. It was the same name as that of the little girl who'd been hit by the car. What was this? I stammered something, unsure what to say, but before I spoke again, I was called over by Robert, who had seen me. "Mark, this is important. Don't talk to her about anything you saw that day, okay?" "But why?" "It's too early for her to remember something as scary as the accident." I nodded, but I felt it wasn't really the real reason. "What did you do to her? How did you... Did you cure her? Or fix her?" I thought, as he always referred to it for some reason. "How did you do it?" Robert smiled, and he gave me the same answer he had given me so many times before. "You simply have to find the parts that are broken and fix them." And that's when I exploded at him. I'd had enough. Even at my age, I knew things weren't as easy as he made them out to be. But that is not how it works. You can't bring someone back to life by fixing their parts, I yelled at him. Robert's face changed to a soft and somewhat sad smile. "You're right, Mark. Sometimes there's no easy way to fix things. Sometimes you have to replace all the parts that are irreparable." I didn't really understand what he was talking about at the time. Was he still talking about humans, or was he talking about machines again? I was puzzled. "It's like with this." He turned away for me to find something else to use to explain things to me, and that's when I saw the chance. I started to run for the door at the end of the shop. I pressed the handle, and with a loud noise that surprised even me, well, it opened. "Mark, what are you..." I heard Robert call out to me, but I came to a halt right away. I had no idea what I was seeing. To this day, I don't know what that place was that I saw back there exactly. I saw futuristic machines and test tubes, various glass tanks and containers, cabinets, computers, innumerable cables connecting it all together. The room stood in stark contrast to the rest of Robert's shop, where everything was dirty, greasy, and old, but this room here was new and clean, almost sterile. In the middle of the room was a large table, and something was laying on it, covered by a large sheet of white cloth. I don't know why, but I went forward and pulled, and I saw a small white arm, a shoulder, and finally a face, a female face. It was right at that point that Robert reached me, pulled me away, and quickly pushed me out of the room. He was yelling at me, but I didn't hear anything. I only saw it for a moment, but I knew whose face I had seen there. And once I gathered myself, I confronted Robert. "Why is she back there? She's outside, isn't she?" Robert's expression changed again. The anger went away, and now his face showed a sad expression again. "What do you do when something is broken, beyond repair?" I didn't know. I couldn't even think of an answer. "In that case," he said, you have to replace the whole thing." It was the statement that freaked me out more than anything, because I knew what he was implying. That little girl outside wasn't really Margaret Miller, but a replacement. Robert didn't say anything else, but he didn't even try to stop me as I walked outside. I saw the little girl again. She was still there where she had been when I arrived. Her friendly but empty smile haunted me for the rest of the summer. Ever since that day, I never went back to Robert's repairs again. The place was wrong. Unnatural. I never found out what Robert did exactly, but I knew it wasn't normal. That summer was more than 10 years ago. I heard a lot more about Robert's ordeals and antics throughout the years. There were stories about more people he fixed. It was all just so weird. I mean, and Robert never did anything wrong to anyone, but somehow I knew what he was doing was wrong. Before you ask, yes, I told my parents about what I saw, but they mostly shrugged it off. They simply didn't believe me and said I shouldn't make up stories like that. However long I pleaded with them and assured them that it was true, they mostly just ignored me. It was right after I finished high school that I left town and Robert's repairs behind. I just couldn't stay there anymore. I'm in a bigger city now. I'm going to college, majoring in the STEM field, which I hate to admit is due to Robert's influence on me as a kid. I recently visited my parents. We talked a lot about old memories and went through a couple of old photo albums of my middle and high school times. Made me feel quite nostalgic. Later that evening, after my parents had already gone to bed, I decided I'd have a look at a couple of other photo albums. Older ones. I remembered that my parents pretty much had created an album for every year of my life. The first thing I noticed was that one of the albums was noticeably thinner than the rest. I was 8 years old at the time. I looked through it and noticed it went from melting snow to early spring, to pictures of autumn. And the next day I asked my mother about the album and where the pictures of my birthday were. She told me I had been very sick that year and had stayed at the hospital for some time. Her eyes betrayed her. She was never good at lying, and I noticed it right away. Even after calling her out on it, she insisted it was true. I tried to think back. Had I ever stayed at a hospital? I couldn't remember anything like it. I thought back to my school days. I would have been in second grade back then. But for some reason, I couldn't pinpoint much about this time, or anything for it, for that matter. I had seen the albums filled with pictures of me in kindergarten, starting school in first grade. But even when I tried my hardest, I couldn't recall anything about it. It was as if all my memories before second grade were missing. I tried as hard as I could. Had I suffered a concussion and lost my memory? Suddenly something came back to me. A smell of oil and grease, of sound of machines and tools. And there it was, the memory of sitting on a bench. My parents running towards me and hugging me. What were those images? Was it at the hospital? And if so, why was I outside? And then it hit me. The grease, the oil, the bench I was sitting on. Same as the little girl who'd been sitting on the bench in front of Robert's shop. It was the same image. Only that I saw it through my own eyes. I had been sitting there too. On the same bench. Waiting as well. I was shaking now because I understood. This must have been when I was in second grade. Almost a year before I'd been visiting Robert regularly. Long before Robert had fixed that little girl, he'd fixed me too. That's why the mother of the little girl had been pleading with him to do it again. I had been fixed by Robert as well. The only question was, what exactly did he do to me? So I want to give a huge thanks to the writer of tonight's story, Renee Wren. Renee is a very talented writer. He's also a YouTube narrator. You can find his channel on YouTube called Renee Writes. And you can also find his book on Amazon. It's titled The Wolf King, Tales with Sharp Teeth. And there's another book called The First Few Times Always Hurt, a collection of short horror stories by Renee Wren. Please check these out. I'll link them in the description below. And also, please take a look at Renee Wren's YouTube channel. It's also very, very good. He's got a lot of videos up there, almost 300 videos. And he's a very talented narrator as well.